The topic that I have been given is recent advances in breast cancer surgery. So, if you really look at all the exciting talk regarding fast forward radiation that we just heard, very well delivered by Dr. Rajesh, and the fancy radiology techniques, radiation oncology techniques, and the newer fancy drugs that are available in the armamentarium of medical oncology colleagues. What are surgeons doing today to improve breast cancer treatment? They play a central role in the management, but what are the recent advances that can help the patient either improve their survival outcome or improve their quality of life and get better at breast cancer surgery so that patients don't live with the sequelae of mutilating or surgery which decreases their self-esteem. So I'll just introduce the topic a little and then go on. The no recent advances talk is complete without talking about oncoplastic breast surgery and how to apply plastic surgery principles in planning breast conservation surgery so that you offer the patients good quality of life. Axillary conservation, a bit about that, because we have talked a lot about sentinel node biopsies and the safety of it. In the post-chemotherapy setting, what is the safety of these axillary conservation procedures? That is one area of research currently. And then the use of newer technology in the surgical setting that can improve surgical morbidity and improve the patient's quality of life. So needless to say, breast cancer is a common cancer. In India, it's also the most common cancer now among women and among all people together, put all together. We see very similar to, I'm sure what you see in Bangladesh is also very similar, is palpable disease, and 30 to 40% are locally advanced tumors. Even when we see early or operable breast cancer, the median tumor size is 3 centimeter and at least 50% are node positive. So we see a higher burden of the disease, a higher stage of the disease. There was an era where breast cancer surgery began with radical surgeries. It was popularized by Professor William Halsted, and that included radical mastectomy, complete removal of the chest wall, skin and the muscles, and all the neurovascular bundle and fibrofatty tissue along with the breast. That surgery prevailed really for 100 years and offered a cure rate of 40%. Then came an era where Dr. Bernard Fisher another surgeon again, introduced the concept of conservative breast surgery and thought that breast cancer could be systemic to begin with, and chemotherapy would also lead to some part of the cure. So came into vogue the modified radical mastectomy, where the musculature of the chest wall was preserved and hence a morbidity of the surgery and the radicality of the procedure was reduced. Today also, modified radical mastectomy stands good cure rate in our setting, especially when patients either do not want breast conservation surgery or sometimes when for multiple socioeconomic reasons they are not able to take radiation therapy, which is so essential in planning breast conservation surgery. Also, when we have locally advanced cancers, a lot of them are actually safer if we offer them a modified radical mastectomy. There are multiple modifications of the procedure. All surgeons are aware of it. And we in Tata Memorial, and I'm sure worldwide, the most commonly done is the Auchincloss procedure, where both the pectoralis minor and major muscles are preserved along with the pectoral nerves. And this transition from radicality to modified radical mastectomy or just a total mastectomy has stood the test of time with a number of randomized controlled trials with a really long-term survival, proving the safety of this procedure in node negative as well as node positive patients. Hence, the focus of breast surgery has now changed, just not from improving survival and minimizing local recurrence, but also optimizing cosmesis, where I will be talking about how to employ these plastic surgery principles to improve the cosmesis after breast conservation surgery. So the goals of the surgery are not to just have no scars, because that is a myth. The surgeons in the group will agree with me that there can be no surgery without scars. There will be scars on the breast. We will try to make them look as best as possible, but scars will be there. What we can rather achieve to do is to maintain shape of the breast, size of the breast, symmetry, nipple position, and good contour of the breast. Even if these goals are met with, patients are happy. Luckily, we are that side of the world where patients are not so demanding with respect to scars. They accept our procedures and our shortcomings, and they are even happy with it. They are even happy with the procedure of mastectomy, and they don't really demand much out of us. However, we should strive to make the surgery better and better, so that even though they don't demand, of course, there will be a sector of the society who will demand it. And even if the others don't demand, there is no harm in providing them a better cosmesis. For mastectomy, so coming to breast conservation surgery, essentially that means today what we are offering is wide excision of the tumor with an adequate margin of the normal breast, combined with an axillary procedure, which is a sampling procedure or sentinel node biopsy procedure. That is to decide the stage of the axilla and also to plan future adjuvant treatment. And as of now, our policy has been that if the axilla is positive, we are clearing the tissue. We are clearing the axillary fibrofatty tissue because of the higher stage that we see in India. And I'm sure that would be the same in Bangladesh. What also is the aim of breast conservation surgery is to have a cosmetically acceptable breast at the end of that. This transition to breast conservation has also come with a multiple randomized controlled trials done, especially in the early breast cancer or operable breast cancer setting, with 20-year survival outcome showing that the breast conservation is not inferior to mastectomy. However, what it proved unequivocally is the role of radiation therapy. Whenever breast conservation surgery is done, it has to be combined with radiation therapy. Otherwise, you have nearly triple the rates of local regional recurrence, which is highly unacceptable. So as I said, multiple trials and long-term data to say that breast conservation is safe, and you must combine this with radiation. Whatever form of radiation that the radiation oncologists are comfortable with, now we move from conventional 25 fractions to hypofractionation, which is 15 to 20 fractions, to now coming to the fast-forward era. And maybe in future, only IORT or a single dose of radiation or something like that. And my radiation oncology colleagues will talk better about that. But the role of radiation is definitely proven in breast conservation, unless, of course, there are rare situations of elderly women where you can let go of radiation. But as a dictum or as a rule, conservation is combined with radiation, and a radiation boost also, which is responsible for not overall survival, but decreasing the incidence of local recurrence. So local recurrence is reduced with radiation boost. Having said that, there are certain contraindications to breast conservation surgery, like pregnant women, especially in the first trimester, because radiation is not given during pregnancy. Multicentric disease, as seen on clinical examination or imaging evaluation, which is required to be thorough in these patients, where you need to be very sure on the imaging that the disease is unifocal or multifocal, but definitely not multicentric. Previous chest wall irradiation, which precludes them from having further radiation, margin positivity in spite of 2 re-excisions, and unable to receive postoperative RT for various socioeconomic reasons. These are the absolute contraindications for breast conservation surgery. Today, we have a lot in our armamentarium when we evaluate a patient for breast conservation. Mammography has been the standard of care. We have ultrasounds whenever necessary, especially in dense breast, younger women. You have contrast-enhanced mammography that makes the tumor, makes lesions more delineated, they are delineated better. And MRI, of course, only when absolutely necessary or when there is a clinico-radiological discordance, you need to resort to doing an MRI as a problem-solving tool. This helps us surgeons to choose patients for breast conservation surgery and improves our surgical outcomes. Margins, as proven, as guidelines are now available by ASCO-CAP, saying that no tumor on the ink is good enough margin. Of course, while I'm doing surgery, I am aiming for a 1 finger margin, which may be 0.5 centimeter to 1 centimeter. But if the pathologist says that there is no ink on the tumor, or if it is 3 millimeter, 4 millimeter, 2 millimeter, it is acceptable. What is the duty of us surgeons is to ensure margin identification so that the pathologist knows which side belongs to what. There are different ways people do this. They can color the surface, they apply different colors. Some people would like to do cavity shave margins. However, what we routinely follow is a simple principle of having skin anteriorly, a short superior stitch and a long lateral stitch that helps our pathologist understand the orientation of the primary tumor. Having talked about breast conservation, the Indian scenario is still quite different, and I'm sure that would be the same in Bangladesh, because a lot of our early breast cancer patients do not want breast conservation surgery, and only 20 to 30% really end up getting it. There are various reasons for this. There is fear of recurrence. There are various, say, socioeconomic reasons. And this is different in tertiary care institutes versus general population or nursing smaller centers. In Tata Memorial, we still have a 60 to 70% rate of breast conservation surgery in the upfront setting and 40 to 45% in the post-chemotherapy setting. But overall, as a country, the rate is as low as 20% across even major centers. So these are further problems that are created for the oncoplastic breast surgery, because when breast conservation surgery is not acceptable, then there are very few people who actually understand and accept oncoplastic surgery because they have some kind of irrational fears. What oncoplastic surgery means is to apply plastic surgery principles for aesthetically modulating the breast, what is essential is to remember that sound oncological principles are more important and the most important thing. And once you have achieved a wide clearance of the tumor, then only one should be worried about aesthetically modulating the breast. However, whenever we are able to do this, obviously it leads to better cosmetic outcome, and that would definitely lead to psychosocial rehabilitation and maintaining a healthy body image of the patient and better quality of life. So in the Indian context, we have younger women, larger tumors, locally advanced tumors. We have more skin resection, and there is also a reluctance for contralateral procedures, which are commonly done in the West. And patient expectations are fortunately different than the Western counterparts. The choice of procedures are really many, and they could be individualized to every patient. Depends on tumor quadrant, breast size, breast and tumor ratio, degree of ptosis of the breast, how does the contralateral breast look like, what are the donor sites available, and of course, what are the personal and cultural preferences of the woman. There are many procedures described: volume displacement procedures, which are local flaps, level 1 procedures, rotation flaps, advancement flaps, level 2 procedures, which are based on more complex plastic surgery principles like mastopexy or reduction mammoplasty based procedures, and volume replacement procedures, or further perforator flaps, pedicle flaps, and free tissue transfer procedures. As I said, the choice of procedures are many and essentially depend upon the available donor site and surgeon choice, and two main factors, which are what is the breast size and what is the degree of ptosis of the breast. One must understand the blood supply of the breast before planning any of these procedures, because the vascularity of the flap or the procedure will really depend upon the blood supply of the breast. And this is essential to consider so as to reduce immediate post-operative complications as well as to have lesser incidence of long-term fat necrosis. So this is the blood supply, which is essentially from internal mammary perforators. 60% of the blood supply comes from that. And then there are lateral intercostal perforators, lateral thoracic artery, which come from the lateral chest wall. And these perforators form a subdermal plexus, which runs in the subdermal plex, in below the dermis, and that essentially provides blood to the skin. So most of the local blood to the breast. Most of these local flaps are based on three basic plastic surgical principles of transposition, rotation, and advancement of tissues. As you can see here, the blood supply which comes from the internal mammary perforator, it enters the subcutaneous plane and gives rise to a plexus in the subcutaneous tissue. This plexus is placed in the subdermal plexus, and that supplies the skin as well as the breast tissue. So based on this, the ladder of oncoplastic breast reconstruction moves from a standard breast conservation surgery to a few simple type 1 procedures where you don't leave behind a cavity and manage to achieve parenchymal closure. You may have to do nipple repositioning at the same time. A little more difficult procedure is to do a local flap or a latissimus dorsi flap, and the tip of the ladder is the reduction mammoplasty and mastopexy based principles, which have a little learning curve, but once learned and understood appropriately, they can be used as per the requirement of the patient, and they serve really well. So I would go through a few cases where we have done what we have done to give example, and then I'll take you through what other oncoplastic procedures that we routinely employ. So this is a 43-year-old lady who had a breast lump, 36C cup size, and a grade 2 ptosis. She had a 4 into 3 centimeter lump in the upper outer quadrant as shown here in the left breast, and strong ERPR positive, HER2 negative. Majority of such patients who are young would receive chemotherapy for downsizing. We should use chemotherapy for breast conservation surgery so that you can downsize the tumor and offer smaller resection. Post chemotherapy, she had a 2.5 centimeter lump, and the node had completely responded. Planned a breast conservation surgery on her. That's how the mammography looked, with a single mass there, and an ultrasound was done to confirm that there was nothing else because this breast is slightly dense. Incision plannings on the breast, much is talked about them. Langer said that they should be circumareolar. Kresel said that they should be radial, and these two are really contrasting thoughts. So when I was looking at how should we really be planning incision on the breast, they should be actually adapted to the form of the breast, the incisions. We know that as the woman ages, the ptosis increases and the breasts do sag down. And with ptosis, the curvature lines of the breast also shift. And this usual dictum that upper half of the breast you should have circumareolar incision and in the lower half radial is no more true. And you can plan incisions as per the breast and as per the individual case, and there should not be any rule that should be followed. So the patient that I was talking about had a breast conservation surgery with a radial incision here in the upper outer quadrant, and she has a reasonable cosmesis. This is 3 years post-operatively, and she's quite happy. So other type 1 procedures essentially involve you to mobilize the two pillars, which I believe is usually only a uniplanar mobilization. One should avoid mobilizing in the subcutaneous tissue because that would cut off the breast tissue from the subdermal plexus and will lead to a higher chance of fat necrosis and immediate post-operative complications. So these are the picture for 1 year post-radiation. Patients have one scar on the breast. Like I told you earlier, scarless surgery is a myth, and there is going to be some scar somewhere, but they are quite accepting of a single scar as long as the rest of the breast contour, symmetry, shape is maintained well. So sometimes you need to do a little bit of nipple repositioning when you have retroareolar tumors, and that maintains the shape and symmetry of the nipple and areola. So this patient had an incision here, which was inadvertently made as a fibroadenoma somewhere else. And when we excised the triangular skin and reposited the nipple, she had a fairly decent post-operative nipple symmetry and shape, as well as breast contour was maintained quite okay. So other techniques of type 1 oncoplasty, a classic described one is a round block technique or donut technique, where tumor located in any part of the breast can be resected by using a circumareolar incision, repositioning the NAC, doing a wide excision of the tumor, and just approximating the parenchyma by mobilizing it. This serves well. However, I don't routinely employ this procedure because it requires extensive mobilization of the breast. And if you can get away with just a single scar, then I would like to personally avoid excessive mobilization. However, it works well when the patients are very worried about scar placement, because this scar can be very well hidden in the circumareolar tissue. And even if it's an inner quadrant tumor, patients don't have a scar in the inner quadrant that is in the social crease, and they are happier. So this is a very useful technique to learn, although I personally don't employ it that often. This can be used for any tumor in any part of the breast by taking a circumareolar incision. However, as I said, I don't recommend that, and I would rather put an incision directly on the tumor and give just one scar rather than causing excessive mobilization of the breast, unless, of course, the patient is extremely conscious about the breast scars and request for no scars or hidden scars. Then one could use this technique. My friend Dr. Tabassum is going to talk later after me, but she will get into the details of how to plan radiation in oncoplastic procedures. But from what I have understood from her and my other colleagues from the radiation department is that a type 1 procedure does not cause them any more trouble as long as we put clips in the base of the resection cavity. So earlier, radiation oncologists would look for seroma. I'm sure all of you agree with me that that era is now gone. Breast surgeons are no more leaving seromas behind, or we should not be leaving seromas behind. What we should be leaving behind to determine the boost volume is the clips. So clips are placed on the muscle, on the tumor bed, sometimes in the parenchyma of the breast, and that will help. And this is a scar. So one anterior skin scar and the tumor boost and the base clips will help my radiation oncology colleagues to plan their radiation boost field. And this is essentially does not pose any problem in type 1 procedures. So this is another case of a 48-year-old lady postmenopausal who had an excision biopsy scar in the upper outer quadrant. The outside tumor size was 3 centimeter. She had a 5 into 6 centimeter scar in the upper outer quadrant with indurated cavity. Had a 36C cup breast and grade 2 ptosis. She was grade 3 TNBC. The mammography, like you can see, showed only post-lumpectomy changes and some volume loss there. She received 4 cycles of epirubicin and cyclophosphamide-based chemotherapy. After that, this is how the scar was placed, and she had an indurated cavity around 6 into 5 centimeter. Now, considering that she already had an excision biopsy of 6 into 5 centimeter, for whom we did not have clear margins, and we did not have knowledge about the margins, we would like to go ahead and clear the margins again. We ended up resecting little more, and that was a little larger resection as what we would have liked. The options that we have for a reconstruction are either a transposition flap or a perforator-based chest wall perforator-based flap or a latissimus dorsi flap. All of the surgeons here would agree that we less commonly use the latissimus dorsi flap nowadays. We want to preserve the latissimus dorsi muscle. The woman doesn't have to be a mountain climber, but the muscle is still functional. And as we preserve the pectoralis major muscle, we have moved from radical mastectomy to modified radical and now breast conservation, we should also be saving the latissimus dorsi muscle on the back. However, it is an option. It is a valid option. Sometimes it is the best option. We used a transposition flap for this patient, which is which can be commonly used. This is how we plan the transposition flap on the lateral chest wall, and it suits very well any tumor situated in the outer half of the breast. It could be upper outer, outer central, or lower outer. A perforator-based flap can also be planned. There are various ways how one can choose to decide between a LICAP or a transposition flap and an LD flap. Whenever you have an excision biopsy scar already placed in the breast, like in this situation, a LICAP, you require skin replacement. There, I'm tempted to rather use a transposition flap. And wherever you don't have an incision on the breast, you can take the lateral mammary crease incision, plan a perforator-based flap, and move the tissue from inside, and the scar is hidden. As again I said, the scar is there, but it is hidden. One may use the LICAP flap. Obviously, one has to be then familiar with perforator dissection and using a Doppler on table to mark the perforator before you start the procedure. For the transposition flap design, does not require any perforator use, and it's slightly easier to do. LD, of course, if the volume is very big, you may sometimes require an LD muscle as well. For that patient, we did a transposition flap from the lateral chest wall. We moved the flap here, and we also provided skin replacement. And this is a post-operative 2-year post-radiation outcome, and the patient is fairly happy with their outcome. This is how a LICAP can be planned for tumor in similar position, even for lower outer quadrant position tumors. This is another example of a transposition flap where multifocal tumors in the upper outer and outer central area of the breast were resected en bloc and then reconstructed with a flap from the lateral chest wall. That is a post-operative outcome, immediate and 1 year post-radiation. This is another example of a transposition flap used for a lower outer quadrant defect, slightly more retroareolar with reasonable post-operative outcome. This flap can also be used for ptotic breast. A lot of our patients, we counsel them for bilateral reduction procedures, but they are not happy to have somebody touch their contralateral breast, which they obviously believe is completely normal, and patients have a right over what kind of surgery they want to choose. In such patients also, this transposition flap serves the purpose quite well in maintaining shape and symmetry of the breast. So it is a random pattern flap utilizing dermal and subdermal plexus. It's oriented along the chest wall perforosome and gets its blood supply from the subdermal plexus, which is formed by the intercostal perforators. Again, my radiation oncology colleagues tell me that whenever we are using volume replacement procedure, it does not interfere with their radiation planning as long as clips are applied appropriately within the breast to guide the boost delivery. We have now published the initial experience of 40 such cases and with reasonably good post-operative outcome. What is advantageous in this flap is that you don't require magnification, you don't require a handheld Doppler to mark the perforator, and there is really no additional cost involved. Now, this is another patient who is a 43-year-old lady who has a tumor in the left lower inner quadrant, 7 centimeter big, 36 C cup size and grade 2 ptosis, IDC3, triple negative breast cancer. She got chemotherapy and all her chemotherapy was over. And this is how we had the patient completely responded to the chemotherapy, but she had residual microcalcifications in the lower inner quadrant of the breast, which had to be removed. So we planned a breast conservation surgery. She was keen on breast conservation. The microcalcifications were excised and a specimen mammography was done to confirm that all the microcalcifications are out with an adequate margin all around. And then a TE flap was used from the inframammary crease and moved into the defect, and she had this post-operative cosmesis. You can often use a rotation dermoglandular flap from the breast for smaller defects in the lower inner quadrant where you do not even need to harvest a TE flap. This rotation flap works quite well for all sizes of breast as long as the defect is excised in the triangular wedge-like manner, and then a dermoglandular flap is elevated off the chest wall and moved into the defect and closed. This is another case of a 47-year-old who had a 3 into 2 centimeter lump in the lower inner quadrant. She had a small breast, 34B size without any ptosis, and she was node negative. Surgery for her. However, the tumor was really such that it would have led to a very poor deformity. It would have led to parrot beaking if we had left it without doing anything. That's the kind of defect that she had. and this leads to poor deformity if we don't do anything for it, because the nipple gets moved inside and she gets parrot beaking. So we planned a flap from the chest wall, which was a Hachette design flap. As you can see, the flap was designed like a Hachette. It was a rotation and advancement flap, where a part of the lateral chest wall tissue was advanced into the defect, and the whole tissue was rotated to fold on itself. These two ends of the Hachette are folded on itself, deepithelialized and buried, and you get she got reasonable post-operative cosmetic outcome. This Hachette design flap can be used for various areas of the breast and serves very well, especially when the defects are located in the retroareolar region. It can also be used for central quadrant defects instead of grisoti. As you can see, this is a small breast, and we had a central quadrant Paget's and retroareolar microcalcification. You can see the Paget's disease here. The plan was originally to do a grisoti flap, but we realized that because of the microcalcification, we had tunneled a bit around, and the defect was larger than what a grisoti would have really would have fallen short for the defect. So we did a Hachette flap again and rotated and advanced the flap into the defect, and she was happy with her cosmesis. It can be a superiorly based rotation advancement flap for smaller defects where you don't require a perforator based flap or an LD flap. So these local flaps come quite handy if they are planned appropriately. Take help from the plastic surgeon in your hospital, because sometimes they have certain ideas with respect to these local flaps which may not come as a part of our general surgical training in breast surgery. So again, this lady is very interesting story, because she's an 83-year-old who had a large area of microcalcification, and she still wanted breast conservation, which is not bad, nothing wrong in that. And then this local flap, designed in a Hachette shape, helped her achieve her cosmesis without having to undergo a long duration procedure. So this is another lady who's a 47-year-old lady, had a 5 centimeter left upper inner quadrant lump with a palpable hard axillary node. She was 38D plus breast and grade 3 ptosis, as you can see. She was non-metastatic. She was HER2 enriched. So we gave her all the chemotherapy first, including Pacli, trastuzumab, etc. And at the end of all the chemotherapy, she had she still had microcalcifications persistent in the left upper inner quadrant, and the rest of the tumor morphologically had really regressed. Ultrasound showed it was a single lump, and rest of the suspicious areas from the breast were wire localized, and VAB was done, and they were all benign. So when we planned her for surgery, this is how we created a defect in the left upper inner quadrant, and a bilateral reduction mammoplasty based procedure was done. This patient really was confused and yo-yoed between doing nothing, just a mastectomy, to doing nothing, to Dr. Saab, let my breast be the way it is, to let's go for mammoplasty and let me have bilateral reduction. So we required some time to counsel her and help her to come to a decision, because as you can see with this kind of a breast, again, my friend and colleague, Dr. Tabassum, will talk better about it, but you can already see an existing asymmetry. And also planning radiation in this case would be a challenge. So a reduction and giving her a better symmetry and a better contour than what she actually was would definitely be ideal. Only if our patients would agree with that. Of course, we are not here to force any patient to agree to what procedures we want to do. What we are here for is to suggest them what is the ideal. And if they agree to that, or if they are convinced by your conviction that this is the best plan for me, then they go ahead and agree with the procedure. So again, whenever we do only microcalcification persistent are there and there is nothing felt by hand, we often do a specimen mammography. We do on-table mammography to make sure that all the microcalcifications are removed with an adequate margin, so that we are convinced that the procedure is successful. And then we plan supromedial bilateral supromedial pedicle based reduction for her. Left-sided inferior pedicle and right-sided supromedial pedicle, and a Weiss pattern skin resection. A part of the defect was filled with some deepithelialized flap from the lower part of the breast, and this is a post-operative outcome. Patients in the immediate post-operative outcome are really happy when their breast goes from this side to this side, and they are actually relieved of all the other side effects that are associated with large breast. So this patient was also happy. Similarly, if you see a patient like this in your outpatient and you're planning a breast conservation surgery, I'm sure my radiation oncology colleagues will be able to give radiation today, even in this size of breast, if the patient disagrees for the procedure. But if I can convince her for a reduction procedure, she can have much better shaped breast in the post-operative period. And even the radiation delivery will be easier, and the side effects of radiation will go down, as I understand. Similarly, this patient who has an upper outer quadrant tumor who wants a BCT is best treated with a bilateral reduction procedure. Some patients want to conserve their breast, come what may. So when this patient came to us, she had a large scar here in the upper central quadrant, and she said, "I don't want breast mastectomy, so you have to conserve my breast." And when we counseled her for a bilateral reduction procedure, she readily agreed for it, and we did a procedure of extreme oncoplasty where took some extra chances, but the patient is doing well, and this is a post-operative 2-year outcome post-radiation. So that is how that surgery was planned. Having talked about a few of the oncoplastic procedures, a latissimus dorsi flap is still a very versatile flap and can be a workhorse of partial breast reconstruction across smaller centers in our country, as well as I'm sure in Bangladesh. So whenever you have a situation where the tumor is multifocal, the radiologist has given you the boundary of the tumor, saying that there are 3-4 areas which look suspicious. You are going to excise a larger volume, and she doesn't have much local flap which is going to fall short of the defect. Then the best thing to do in these cases is an LD flap, which restores breast volume and cosmesis reasonably well. Again, a patient with dense breast and 5 tumors. As you can see on the MRI image here, there are multifocal tumors and multiple satellite nodules, who was very keen on conservation, who was thin and did not have any other fat in the body. So we did an LD flap, and her post-operative cosmesis is good. This is a case of our extended LD flap use for whole breast reconstruction. This also can be done for smaller size breast, and the patients are happy post-operatively. This is 1 year post-treatment. She was only DCIS and did not even require radiation. And now she wants me to augment the other breast to match this size. So when we talk about oncoplastic surgery, these are a few examples that I gave you of how surgery can be planned better to restore the shape and size of the breast in the postoperative period. What we worry about in these cases is the oncological safety of doing so, the delivery of adjuvant therapy, whether our postoperative complications are going to delay her chemotherapy or delay her adjuvant radiation, and how good is the cosmetic outcome at the end will really depend upon the surgeon's experience and training, choice of procedure, and of course, our radiation planning has to be done appropriately. What is important in oncological safety is the status of margins immediately, re-excision rates, because if re-excisions are required after these procedures, it's really cumbersome. All the surgeons will agree with me that going back in an oncoplastic procedure done breast and doing a margin revision is a nightmare, and we like to avoid it as much as possible by ensuring that the margins are adequate the very first time. Local recurrence rates one needs to look at, and of course, what is ultimately important is long-term survival. And as we saw that the surgery for breast cancer has evolved from radical to modified radical to total mastectomy to breast conservation in a very systematic, stepwise, randomized controlled manner. However, this transition from breast conservation to using oncoplastic principles has not really had level 1 evidence, and I'm unsure whether we will have such kind of level 1 evidence coming up. So what we will have to rely on is long-term long-term studies, prospective, retrospective studies, which will give us an idea. The problem here is radiation boost planning. And again, like my friend Tabassum will talk more about it, radiation boost planning can be troublesome in especially cases where reduction mammoplasty or mastopexy-based principles are used for oncoplastic surgery. And with proper dialogue between us and the radiation oncologist, where we actually help them in planning the boost cavity nearly for every case with proper application of bed base clips as well as cavity wall clips, we can rather reduce the amount of area that needs to be boosted and can have even better cosmetic outcome and less scarring due to radiation. So often, if one were not to talk to the surgeon, they might overestimate the tumor bed volume and the whole flap may get contoured. But when we talk to them and we tell them that the cavity walls have actually come together because of the oncoplastic procedures, they can fashion their boost planning in such a way so as to reduce the area that needs to be boosted. There are enough retrospective and prospective data available now talking about the safety of these procedures. This is a single institution last study from MD Anderson, and there was no difference in overall survival or recurrence rate when breast conservation was compared with breast conservation alone and when used with reconstruction. The margin involvement rates were same, local recurrence rates were same, and the complication rates were rather better. And this has been not just proven in single series, but even systematic reviews have shown the same. Some of the very first institutions where oncoplastic surgery was started. This is data from Milan single institution study, which looks at where they actually did a match cohort analysis of patients who had oncoplastic surgery versus those who had standard breast conservation surgery, and found that there was no difference with respect to long-term outcome, overall survival, local recurrence rate, margin negative positivity, etc., etc. And there was really no difference, and this seems to be safe. And again, reduction mammoplasty, 350 procedures published by Krishna Klo, one of the pioneers of oncoplastic surgery in the world. And at a good 6-year median follow-up, the margin positive rate of 12.6% was acceptable with very little complication rate, and there was no delay in starting adjuvant. However, we must keep in mind that this is the long-term mature data from high volume centers. When we start off in the beginning and it's a low volume center, the surgeon needs some time to build up experience and to get over the learning curve. So the complication rate will go down as the surgeon will do more and more of these procedures and will get better and better at it. So your initial few patients, you need to be more careful and you need to be on your toes to make sure that no complications happen. And even if they do happen, they are appropriately managed in good time so as the adjuvant is not delayed. So even after even after a mastectomy, there are various options of whole breast reconstruction. In our institution, autologous whole breast reconstruction using body's own tissue is the gold standard. We have a strong microvascular team, which could be free flap based or pedicle. Implant based reconstruction can be tried in patients who do not have body fat or who are not willing to have another scar in another area of the body and who want an implant. However, we don't do this as a preference, and we prefer the autologous as a gold standard. So these are some of the examples where pedicle tram is used for breast reconstruction, whole breast reconstruction. And these are examples of primary DIP flap, that is deep inferior epigastric artery perforator based flap from the abdomen. Patients get a free tummy tuck, so that's their incentive when we counsel them that you are going to get rid of the fat from the abdomen, and some of them are happy with that. Even if abdominal fat is not available, our plastic surgeons are able to use alternative areas like gracilis, superior gluteal artery perforator, lateral thigh flap, and at least restore the mound of the patient. Going the complete way of reconstruction of breast, getting an areola tattooed, getting nipple reconstructed. Well, patients that we see in Tata Memorial are not so keen on it, but I'm sure as time changes and as we get more advanced and as the country overall gets more developed, we will have patients who will want to go the whole way into breast reconstruction and will ask us to reconstruct the nipple as well as the areola. So a little bit about prophylactic mastectomies, because this is again recently taken a lot of center stage in management of breast cancer, to be done in BRCA1 and 2 mutated or genetic mutation carriers or patients. And there are various incisions that one can plan for the skin sparing and nipple sparing mastectomies for prophylactic reasons. We don't do many of these. We do around 10 to 15 in a year. And this was a patient who wanted a bilateral mastectomy after a BCS when her genetic clinic report came as BRCA1 mutation. And we did a completion mastectomy on one side and a nipple sparing mastectomy on the other. And she had bilateral DAP from her abdominal wall with reasonable restoration of her breast size and good symmetry. So I must quote this paper from Silverstein. Again, Melvin Silverstein is one of the pioneers of oncoplastic breast surgery and even extreme oncoplasties. He said that the swell is building, the wave is coming, it will break on your shore, get aboard and get on, or the wave will sleep you out to sea. So that just means that all the breast surgeons today have to be aware of the options that are available, plastic surgical options that are available for patients for improving their breast appearance and cosmesis after breast conservation surgery. What is a normal breast to you and me does not matter. What matters is what the patient perceives it as. It could be personal, it could be cultural or socioeconomic variation, and we need to pay respect to what the patients want. What we also need in this oncoplastic surgery future is we need to have more patient-related outcome measures and quality of life studies, improving cosmetic outcomes and objectively being able to measure it, improving our morbidity procedure skill so that morbidity goes down, and we need to collaborate across centers to collate our data and to ensure prospectively that these are safe procedures for our patients. Because even Krishna Klo said that to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So you don't have to use the procedure just because you know how to do it. So the philosophy of breast cancer surgery, I may be a bit utopic here, but the philosophy has been that every patient should have discussion regarding breast conservation if the tumor and the imaging radiology allows us to have breast conservation, and there is no contraindication to that. Every mastectomy patient should be given the choice of whole breast reconstruction, and every effort should be made to restore breast size, shape, symmetry, and contour by various oncoplastic procedures when you're planning breast conservation surgery. So coming a bit to what else is new in breast cancer, ICG fluorescence imaging has really taken increased, the applicability has increased by leaps and bounds in the last 20 years. And it's a handheld probe which excites the laser light, and we can, whenever the dye is given, it excites the laser dye, and with the appropriate laser frequency light, it can illuminate lymph nodes or even vascularity of the flaps. So sentinel node biopsy using indocyanine green, we are doing that more routinely now. It's a dual tracer technique where we use ICG and methylene blue. It has been compared with the standard of care, which was always radiocolloid technetium-99 labeled sulfur colloid. However, with ICG, the identification rate has been proven to be 100%, and the false negative rate is really low. So there are many studies today available, including meta-analysis showing that indocyanine green can be used for sentinel lymph node biopsy, and it is safe. This is what we use in Tata. This is the dye that we use, Oro Green, and that's the machine that we have purchased from a French company. We give around 0.1 to 0.5 milligram per kg body weight dose after reconstituting this powder, and this can be used for sentinel node biopsy in this manner. As you can see, it has been given intradermally in the breast, and this is you have to just make the room dark, and this is how the green node or the fluorescent node looks under the scope on your screen, and you can then see it with your naked eye that it is a node which is green or fluorescent, and then you can excise that and send it for sentinel node biopsy testing. So we have been doing a bit of reverse axillary mapping, lymphangiography for this, using this indocyanine green also. And as we all know, that lymphedema is a common side effect of breast surgery, which is seen almost in 30 to 40% of patients. However, 5 to 10% patients get severe lymphedema. The lymphedema rates go down whenever you do a sentinel node biopsy procedure. But there are patients for whom we need to clear the axilla completely. They could be post-chemotherapy, or they could be having positive nodes. And whenever even one node is positive, our policy has been to complete a lymph node clearance. So what makes lymphedema a common side effect is because the arm lymphatics also drain through the same axillary route. And if we can identify these arm lymph nodes which are draining lymphatics from the arm, then we may be able to preserve them, and we can avoid toxicity of or side effect of treatment. We have gathered some experience with respect to reverse axillary lymph node mapping, where we have used a blue dye for the breast and green dye or the ICG for the arm, and identified the fluorescent nodes. However, the very fact that reverse axillary mapping has not really become common practice is because 30 to 40% of the times the sentinel node is the same for the arm and the breast. And if the idea of sentinel node is that it has to be tested for tumor, then there is no way we can not test it. So 25 to 30% of the times, patient from the arm will drain to the same lymph node. So whatever procedure you do may not help save the arm lymphatic, and especially if it is involved by breast cancer, then there is no point preserving it. I'm not getting into the details of other plastic surgery procedures like lympha, where you can identify the lymphatic vessel draining from the arm and then re-anastomose it along with the vein in the axilla and restore the lymphatic supply. But much is also being developed by our plastic surgery colleagues on that side, where we are trying to do these lympha procedures prophylactically to prevent lymphedema in patients who have had complete axillary lymph node dissection. Another area where ICG is used by us in understanding perfusion of the mastectomy flaps, which are essentially very random, and they have a 10 to 15% chance of flap necrosis. Usual technique has been to identify the flap vascularity issues by clinical judgment on table. Sometimes on table you do not realize, and you realize only in the post-operative period, and maybe 1 in 10 patients has a flap necrosis. So worldwide, ICG has been used for predicting mastectomy skin flap necrosis, especially in procedures like skin sparing mastectomy and nipple sparing mastectomy, and especially whenever a reconstructive procedure is combined with that. And they say that you could reduce your complication rate by identifying gray areas by this ICG flap evaluation, and then probably trim them on table to reduce your post-operative morbidity. Like in this case, if you see, the ICG had an uptake which was quite well everywhere, except some areas of blue color, which led to superficial necrosis in the post-operative period. There are certain cutoffs they've described for 30% or 40%, depending upon which paper you're looking at, to understand what perfusion of the tissue is known to be is associated with a higher complication. And what was essentially agreed was that if perfusion was more than 45%, the flaps generally did well.
Madam, we are running short of time. We have a question answer session.
Yeah, I'm going to wind up in 2 minutes. So that's another area where this is one of my cases where we have done a subacute mastectomy and ICG evaluation of the flaps post-operatively. The other thing to talk about is management of non-palpable breast lesions. Fortunately, we don't see these many in our part of the world, but what the West is really doing is radioactive seed localization, various non-radioactive radar localizations, magnetic seed localizations for non-palpable areas, and then biopsying them, converting the OR suit into some fancy techniques and equipment, even for identifying post-chemotherapy lymph nodes where they are being targeted with radioactive iodine seed or radioactive or a kind of magnetic seed, so that we can improve the accuracy of sentinel node biopsy in the post-chemotherapy setting. So the take-home message from this was my last slide. Anyway, the take-home message is that breast cancer surgery is rapidly evolving and it's a dynamic field. It is really shifted from radicality to conservatism to maintaining better cosmesis. However, we should have no compromise on long-term outcome. At the same time, optimize cosmesis and improve quality of life. But what is important for me is in quality of life, the most important part of it is life. So if that is not maintained, then quality of life does not exist. Thank you very much, and I'm open to any questions that you have. I will try to answer to the best of my ability.